Dziękuję.
Dziękujemy przedstawicielowi firmy Microsoft za interesującą prezentację z zakresu OSINT. Proszę Państwa, przed nami już ostatni referat z tej sesji. Klasyczne podejście do ochrony zasobów nie tylko informacyjnych wykorzystuje tak zwaną ochronę obwodową, zwaną też ochroną perymetryczną. Od pewnego czasu trwają dyskusje na temat skuteczności tego sposobu ochrony oraz prace nad systemami zabezpieczeń stanowiącymi bądź to alternatywę, bądź uzupełnienie ochrony perymetrycznej. Ponieważ klasycznym przykładem tego typu ochrony jest płot otaczający ochroniony obiekt, więc nie powinien dziwić tytuł kolejnej prezentacji. Rozmowa przez ogrodzenie, którą zaprezentuje przedstawiciel firmy Palo Alto Networks, pan Jasper Berg Olsen. Zapraszam.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for hanging in there. All right. Well, we get this, there it is. We're ready. I'll try to remind myself not to walk too much around. And as you probably noticed, I'm going to do this in English because my Polish is not very good. I tried it at the hotel arriving just yesterday, and the unfortunate event was that the receptionist talked back to me in Polish, which I totally didn't understand, so I had to revert to English. So I'll stick to English. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to be presenting what I call talking through the fence. This is a perspective on what modern military organizations are both doing right now in different countries across the region, but also what other organizations are looking to do. So a bit about adding communication capabilities through the different layers and segments in your networks. But first let me introduce myself and the organization that I come from. My name is Jasper. I'm the Chief Security Officer and the Director in Palo Alto Networks for Northern Europe and some elements of Eastern Europe as well. I'm a strategic cybersecurity advisor for some of the largest customers we have and for military and governmental institutions as well. I've spent the better part of 25 years in the Danish Armed Forces, started out as a military police officer, bodyguard team lead, doing a couple of missions, and then moving into technology, where I was developing software for highly classified systems, doing system architecture design, and then establishing the National Cryptographic Management Center in Denmark, providing cryptography and communication security services to the Danish government and the entities we support. After that, I was the national representative in NATO in terms of communication security and cryptographic security. So a long history there. I then transitioned into Maersk, being a CISO in Maersk Drilling, operating the security strategies and security programs for onshore and offshore cybersecurity. Very interesting journey that was. And today, proud to say I'm at Palo Alto Networks. So very shortly, Palo Alto Networks' vision is something that's closely aligned with my own personal vision, where each day is safer and more secure than the one before. We secure more than 85,000 customers globally, and that is a number that not only are we very proud of it, but is also something we're very aware of. Securing that many organizations globally also means you have a responsibility to give back to the community. And that is what we aim to do, not only by being here today, but also in some of the relationships we have with different government institutions around the world. So let me first dive into some of the history and the evolutions. I'm not going to linger too much on this. I know it's late in the day as well, and you probably all know your history. Some of you might know it a lot better than I do. But one thing I find interesting is that we as humans have moved away from this, what I call sticks and stones era, where everybody was manually, right? We were meeting in the battlefield, standing frontal, face-to-face, warlord to warlord, and the warlord that really understood the battleground, you know, the ones that understood the terrain and started utilizing the terrains, those were the ones who would oftentimes come out the winner of that, whatever battle that one might be. And it's very similar, that adapting strategy in the battlefield where you start utilizing the differences in the terrain, start utilizing flanking, different skills for different type of engagements that you run in. You could use projectile weapons, an attack from a distance, or you could use hand-to-hand, whatever that might be. That world of adapting strategies of the battlefields does also apply in cyber. So the evolving world of cyber started in the very early, both 70s and 80s, when you saw the first computer viruses coming out. And that time, computer virus was not intentionally a virus. The very first one actually was simply meant to be a copy protection, but it had a self-replicating feature, so it didn't take that long for it to turn into a computer virus that could self-replicate across networks. That was back in the 70s. In the 80s, it turned into a more disruptive, where you could disconnect devices from networks, and that was predominantly in the US and the university-connected networks back then. But still, it was starting to increase. So the evolving world of cyber also saw this evolution in the type of battlefield, all the way up to today, where this is a clear element that you need to consider in a modern age of warfare. I've visualized it here with two swords. The one you might recognize is a ceremonial sword, actually from this country. I really like it, it's beautiful. But if you compare it to the lightsaber right next to it, it's much similar to comparing, the approach to physical security back in the medieval times to the evolved cybersecurity that we do today. One has a clear advantage over the other, right? You could also align that methodology towards the adoption of cloud consumption use. Today, a lot of organizations are still focused on perimeter security being the right answer to many solutions. So building perimeters and then fencing everything, making sure no one can penetrate. The only struggle is that you can't communicate outwards either, right? So you can't communicate or talk through the fence unless you open doors, unless you provide that connectivity. And that's where cloud come into play. And that's where the internet comes into play. And that ties into all the layers and barriers we then apply. So when we talk about defense in depth or depth in defense, there are all these different layers, whether it's physical security, perimeter security, network security, endpoint security, application security, data security, or at the very core of it, what we consider our critical assets, and that is different from organization to organization. But the approach of defense in depth or depth in defense is similar for many organizations, including military and private, right? It was one of the areas that I spent a lot of years working on in Danish Defense IT Agency as well, providing these encrypted layers of network capabilities, segmenting and continuous to segment, having totally separated and disconnected networks for certain elements. But then we saw a new world where you need the connectivity. Here's a good example of that. A very secret system, or kept very secret, is the weapons control system on a battleship, for instance. A weapons control system on a battleship is not something you want on the internet. That makes sense for everybody. The challenge was that Denmark is not very big, so we needed an external contractor to update the systems, to maintain the systems, to monitor the systems. And for that, they needed connectivity, because we couldn't bring them on a battleship moving into, for instance, the fight against pirates. So you have to establish a connectivity. And if you only have a perimeter security, that means that you have to trust an external contractor with a connection straight into the weapons control system on board a battleship, even during operations. That is not going to happen unless you really, really think about it, right? So that requires someone to either go through all these layers of defense or apply continuous validation and continuous monitoring to that specific connection. And there are many other examples of this. Battlefield command systems, where the commander in the battlefield has live feeds on his arm in a tablet, always being able to spot where the troops are moving. That too requires updates. You need that map data. Unless you're generating the map data yourself, you need a contractor that can fill in that data. So how do you establish those connections? So just taking a step back and trying to understand why I use these terms about continuous validation and continuous monitoring. I just want to show a bit, and I apologize on beforehand, I don't like the wolf cries, always coming with the bad news and everything, because I think you already know that in a cybersecurity landscape. But this is a visualization of cyber attacks, or cyber breaches, from 2007 to 2011. It doesn't look that bad, but let me skip to a slide where this is a visualization of the last 2 years. From 2019 to 2021, it's a totally different picture. It does not look that good, to be honest. So why is the cyber hygiene, the basic hygiene principles, why are they so challenged? Well, I already talked about the perimeters sort of being penetrated purposely for different types of services, sometimes not purposely for attackers, right? But these are some of the elements that comes into the basic cyber hygiene, whether it's cloud environments or internet-facing assets, or all the way on the other side, we talk about mergers and acquisitions. That's probably not as relevant in the military services, but it still can be. Maybe you have a branch that operates their own internal IT or OT infrastructure, and now there's a business purpose for having that connected to the rest of the services, because you want to share the intelligence or you want to share the models that works in there. Whatever purpose it might be, you have to be able to ingest that infrastructure and landscape as well. And then the biggest element down here in the bottom, that's the people. You need to trust people to some extent. But you also know that people can be influenced, right? One of the trends we see are ransomware groups are being really, really smart and innovative about the way they approach organizations today. They actually go out and call employees of organizations, members of military services as well, directly, offering them a sum of money if only they click a link, if only they plug in a USB device that all of a sudden appears in their mailbox. And they pay them rather large amounts of money, because the ransomware gangs know that they're going to get that money back as soon as they do this. So people is now a very big challenge. So just taking a bit step, now we talked a bit about the basic cyber hygiene. I'm going to talk a bit about the people, then the process, and then the technology, right? So very quickly, who's doing cybersecurity? And you already know this, so this is just a repeat of what we know. Everybody should be involved in cybersecurity. Everybody. Everybody should take this seriously, at work or at home. One of the things I teach a lot to different C-levels is, have you ever reset your router's default password? When you get an internet connection from your ISP, have you ever considered the internet password or the password that's in that internet service provider router? No, they haven't. So I teach them how to do that. It's just a basic element. But if you don't understand the importance of changing default passwords or applying security at home, it's really hard to understand why you should do so at work. But it's a critical element. Of course, the specialist here should do more. And the specialist should be focusing around behavioral analysis, the awareness security alignments, the continuous test and verification of their security resilience in people, the adapting programs that fits and scales with talent and talent acquisition. The symbols that is placed on this slide, they're there to place a bit of emphasis on the requirements that you're going to see in the future as well. We all know we have a cyber skills shortage problem right now. So how do we get new people? And I think this place is one of the great places where you can actually influence, right? But it is a challenge in all organizations. So it's all about building and maintaining those talent programs. Now, if we talk about the processes from an organizational perspective, there are many ways of looking at processes and the practices that you apply. This is just one example of how you can do maturity assessments and how you can look at your processes. So divided here in 5 levels where you can go from perform to actually optimizing processes. I would say for a process perspective, that should be the target. Move towards optimizing as much as you can. One thing is documenting processes, documenting what you do, but moving towards where you focus solely on optimizing your processes, that's a sweet spot. And that, of course, means that your practices have to follow. So talking about basic cyber hygiene, again, understanding the importance and moving all the way up to what we call the proactive cybersecurity capabilities, being able to prevent attacks rather than respond to attacks, for instance. So this slide is normally built up by a series of animations, but I'm going to try to walk you through that. If you look at the different classifications that, for instance, NATO applies, and I'm pretty confident you have a similar classification scheme. We do in the Danish defense, and they do across Scandinavia, in the Baltics as well, same classification scheme, right? You operate with a level of unclassified systems that is somehow connected to some internet services, right? That allows you to apply your security controls and enforce your security controls across all the technology landscapes in there, because you can communicate a lot more freely with each other. It also allows your security tooling to be operated centrally and remotely. When you move into the classifications or deeper into the systems, it becomes a challenge. You still, as I said, for some services, you might need integrations, you might need communications. Perhaps you introduce data diodes so you can have one-way communication. But again, I'm going to tell you about an experience I had when I was using data diodes. It was quite simple. I knew about it, I implemented in a secret system. The challenge was secret, also meant need to know. So it was documented in a particular place, I knew about it. The chief architects that came on 2 years later didn't know about it. And they designed a new data diode, just the opposite direction. So two opposing data diodes, that creates the bidirectional pathway, right? So all of a sudden, one data diode is taken out, the other one is set in, and then you have communication in and out of that system. And that is a terrible situation to be in when you realize it. So moving up of these classifications, as you can see, and that's illustrated by the bullets beneath there, it's also say that you have fewer internet-enabled services available, and you most likely don't have anyone when you move into the very secret systems. It's what we call offline or island mode systems, right? But you have multiple systems in there. How do you deal with your security tooling in there? And that's a challenge, right? So let me share a bit about what we see in a technology that's fit for tomorrow. First of all, we know that everybody needs visibility. If you don't have visibility, you're blind, you can't see, you can't do, right? You need simplicity and you need flexibility. Why do you need simplicity? Well, we already mentioned that the skill shortage is a big problem. The simpler the tooling, the easier to hire, right? The simpler the tooling, the easier to utilize during the immediate response phases. So it makes it a lot easier to work with. And then of course automation, because you need to free up your resources to focus on what really matters. You know, it shouldn't be people looking at every event, every alert. 90% of those alerts can probably be handled manually, or automated. But that is a big difference. And that requires your technology to be, as you can see in the bottom, integrated, automated, and simple. And how do you apply that? Well, if I look at the same sort of classification scheme here, I'm starting from the perimeter outside, and now I call it a perimeter, but it's more of a surface. In this case, that requires you to have an attack surface management ideology. You need to take that concept to heart and leverage attack surface management. I've seen some of the other presentations today, and they were talking about open source intelligence. The threat intelligence is vital, but it doesn't help you if you don't have context, right? And the same goes for visibility. If you're not able to tie your threat intelligence into some actionable items, it doesn't really provide you with that value. So you need something that covers the entire arena of your technology landscapes. Now, when you have that, you need, and that's where the box is in between the colored areas here they describe. You need strong segmentation that provides you with inline security capabilities. Not just the security capabilities, like the standard ones you know, but also data loss prevention, for instance, or data classification protection schemes. So applying that at the different levels allows you to also understand and track your data transactions across the different segments. And that is vital. You might have simplistic rules for a contractor to place map data in a specific location internally, but that specific location has to be enforced by your security policies, and that's what the other boxes underneath the segmented boxes illustrate here. Closed segmentation or micro-segmentation is essential for having those type of services in your network. And ultimately, applying technology from a very holistic perspective, I understand this, but applying technology in these layers should allow you to also be able to identify all of the devices that is communicating and all the devices that you could consider a threat in these different threat landscapes. You can see them here in the green unclassified area. That could be anything from IoT devices, mobile devices, etc. In the confidential and restricted area, it's probably more like laptops and printers. And in the secret area, it's dedicated workstations and servers traditionally, right? But you have to be able to apply security policies and enforce those security policies, continuously validating and monitoring that area. So my recommendations is, you need to start the conversation today of what is the ambition of your connectivity? What do you want? What do you need of connectivity, not just now, but also in the future? And my bet is that you are probably more online today than you thought you would be 5 years ago. Imagine how that image is going to look in 5 years' time. How online are you then? Purely online, everything is connected. Maybe you still have a few disjoint networks, but you need to start the conversation today because it takes time to develop the strategies behind it as well. And then we have a saying that we don't want anyone to reinvent the wheel. Partner up with large organizations in the private sector as well to leverage their understanding of how they can help build these frameworks. Ask the right questions as well. It's really hard to understand the technology you need if you haven't asked the right questions. One of the questions could be, like I just said, where do you want to be in terms of connectivity in 5 years from now? Does that require zero trust as a strategy, for instance? I know it's a bit of a buff and a hype word to say, but zero trust is big. It's all about the micro-segmentation, understanding users, applications, and infrastructure at the same time. And that brings me to the last bullet. Make sure your technology can integrate and communicate to each other so you can take advantage of that visibility and the context that you get in there. Make sure the technology is simple and make sure it's built for automation because you need that for the future. You're only going to see more events in the future, more incidents, potentially more breaches, so make sure you can automate as much as you can. So, history and evolution, we went through the situation, what it is right now, a bit of who, how, and what. I talked a bit about technology needs. I'm more than happy to dive into some of the technicalities, but I wanted this to be a very high level as well, and then our recommendations. If you want to learn a bit more about Palo Alto Networks and what it is we do, there's a link, and there's a link for me as well. That ties me to the last slide. Our mission is to be the cybersecurity partner of choice, protecting our digital way of life. So if there is anything you think we can help you with, reach out, and we're ready. Thanks. Any questions? I have a translator over here if you are more comfortable in stating it in Polish. Silence. All right, thank you.
Dziękujemy za prezentację. Proszę Państwa, mamy jeszcze chwilę, dosłownie 5 minut, bo sąsiedni panel skończył obrady na 2-3 krótkie pytania, które możecie Państwo naszym prelegentom zadać. Proszę bardzo. Nie widzę, nie słyszę, w związku z tym uważam, że panel został tym samym zamknięty. Zapraszam wszystkich do sali kinowej na podsumowanie całości konferencji, natomiast ci z Państwa, którzy oglądają nas na YouTubie, proszeni są o przełączenie się na pierwszy link. Dziękuję bardzo.